growth and progress is always necessary. Now, in the sense that there's that one final goal, sure, we want to bring bottlenecks toward that. Obviously, we do want a better quality of existence for ourselves and than others, logically speaking at least. And then that's not going on right now, and so sure, we want to bring bottlenecks towards that. But there isn't necessarily like a rush, and growth, again, is kind of besides the point, or progress is kind of obvious. Let me give you a great example of very real. Yesterday, I was driving here, okay, to this hotel, right? And a car literally just would have swerved straight into me, and like there was just two lanes, and he just somehow just didn't see me. I was passing on the right side left a little bit, less slowly, and he just would have driven into me. And the only reason he didn't, it's kind of tragic, right, given my car, but the only reason he didn't was I was paying attention to the bottleneck, which I on purpose do when I drive. I don't talk on the phone. I really try to talk to people as best as I can. Without being completely rude to someone I don't know very well, I really try to have them talk. But I'll tell my wife, like I try to keep her on here. She's still, it's a little hard for her, but she's. What's the bottleneck? Like when I'm driving somewhere, so people will talk on the phone when they're driving, right? And they'll be like, why? Because progress, right? Like they're accomplishing something while they're driving. But if I had been talking on the phone and I on purpose don't, and instead I pay attention to the real bottleneck, if I'm going from here, from my house to the jury, it's about 7 minutes or less, right? So how much progress I can make by strategically talking on the phone during that time is very little. I could definitely organize my day so I could just talk some other time and make just the same amount of supposed progress in my life if I'm talking on the phone. Right? Instead, I'm paying attention to whatever the other cars can do. And I'm thinking, right, it's like ultra defensive driving, and it's weird because you can't just swerve anytime someone's next to you in the lane. Like it's a really difficult situation. I actually had it happen one other time. I've only gotten these 2 near misses in about 6.5 years of having a car, but I mean this car, obviously I have other cars. But the other one was right outside the jury. There was someone merging from the highway kind of, and they just went over like 2 lanes and they would have driven literally straight into me. And I'm paying attention, including I'm not trying to get justice. I'm not trying to honk or teach them a lesson because that can confuse them. I just don't want to hit me. I don't want them to hit me. If I honk, God knows what they'll do, right? If someone just honks really loudly right behind my ear, who knows what the person's going to do? I would. So I don't even. I'm just looking, but I was somehow, just in case, I'm looking carefully at them. I'm thinking only about if I'm next to someone in a car. I'm not, of course, trying to lecture anyone about driving. I'm just illustrating this concept of progress. Intuitively, you're trying to get to where you're going, and you're feeling that progress. And that's kind of what you're thinking, or you might want to be on the phone, you feel like progress there. But I'm thinking, what's the bottleneck? And the real issue that's going on when I'm driving is not crashing. It's just such a bigger bang for my buck. And it really would have happened yesterday if I wasn't absolutely paying attention and ready. Like I'm proactively thinking about, like if I'm just literally going to be next to someone on the road, they could just do that. And it's very rare, but they could. And because it's rare, we often don't think about it. But I was actually thinking about them doing it, as it's a habit, and I was able to avoid it. And I did the same thing with the other car that just went into me. And again, it's hard because you can't just swerve over every time someone's next to you in the lane. So it's not an easy thing to deal with. You have to be like really watching their wheels, like get close to the thing and thinking, is this possible? They could actually just be about to just drive into me out of nowhere with no rain. It wasn't dark, it wasn't rainy, it was nothing, but they just would have. And so again, that's another illustration where our mind defaults to I want to get there or I want to, accomplish something in a lot of cases. But it takes on purpose to think of, the bottleneck, right? Another quick driving example of a bottleneck type of thinking, because it's not obvious. To think about bottlenecks, it's logically, again, it can make sense when we're talking about it, when we're pointing it out. Yeah, okay, bottlenecks. But our mind is going to constantly go other places, right? Even at the age of 10, I'm starting to teach my son, and when it's a time that it made sense, it was just a situation. But you don't just need to leave enough space between yourself and the car for you to stop. You need to leave enough space if there's something sudden for the car behind you to see you stopping and them to stop, right? Which people don't think about as much as oh no, I can stop, right? No, you need to be able to blink your brakes and stop slowly so the car behind you won't hit you. And again, that's something that comes up, really happens, plenty, where people will get hit from behind and they can stop in time. It's not easy for you. The point of that is not just that one maybe trivial until it happens to you or you avoid it kind of thing, right? But just that a little bit, it illustrates a certain type of thinking, right, about driving, and then that just illustrates a certain thing about what's the real bottleneck. The real bottleneck when I'm thinking how much distance to leave is not whether I can stop in time. The real bottleneck is whether the person behind me can stop in time. I mean, of course, we can iterate that a little bit. And, the more space you give, the more slowly you can do, the better chance the guy behind you has, right, of stopping. That's the real bottleneck, and that's just an illustration, not from business in this case. I'll give some business examples. So what I want you to do from this talk is to have a red flag of when you start to just take it for granted that it's the right answer to want progress. Say, well, first of all, this is just, my brain wants perceived progress. Right, because it can't know again. There's a kind of, I wish I knew it off the top of my head perfectly, but there's kind of, I think it's kind of like a Chinese proverb, story, anecdote, not anecdote, but type of thing where a guy's if I was, it could be something like something seemingly good happens to him, and you're like, oh, good, and then no, it turns out that because that good thing happened, something really seemingly bad happened, and then oh, that's terrible, and then because of that thing, they broke their leg. It's oh, that's really bad. You broke your leg because it seemed like this good thing happened to you, and then you broke your leg on the way going. You got a good job, and you're going there, and you're happy, and on the way you break your leg. Oh no, that's not a bad setback. Because you broke your leg, you avoided a draft, a military draft, and then oh, good, and then because you avoided that, but something worse happened. So anyway, it just quickly, it's just kind of a funny way to illustrate how things can be perceived as progress. And even without going too much into detail in this moment about business, we can definitely, something I pay attention to big time that affects me, at least in business, is that feeling of being filled up with progress that day, right? That I did something that might just keep me from doing what I really need to do. See, and that brings me to yet another problem, another example of distraction from if we feel again, our mind is going to go here subconsciously, kind of automatically, and it's going to feel right. And then because that happens to everyone, that's how regardless of how smart you are or what culture, there's certain algorithms that human minds kind of follow, right? It's kind of logical, biological, and so forth. It doesn't really matter who you are. And I find that fascinating, and so it's one of my interests, and it blends in with my philosophy and so forth, is it's very interesting to see how minds are going to operate by default. And we want to embrace that is how they operate by default. You can't really change how your brain operates. It's kind of like you don't fundamentally change a computer, right? You just work with how it works, right? And so there's certain things about how our minds work that we need to work with, not just declare, oh, I don't do this anymore. Oh, I don't do. But if we want progress, we also, hand in hand with that, our mind is going to try to avoid regress, which is a feeling of regress, like doing something where it makes us feel incompetent. Right, so we'll shy away from things that are more new, that we're more incompetent at, but that might be the bottleneck. It might not, but if it's the bottleneck, we want to only be thinking about what's the bottleneck and focus on that. Intuitively, we'll feel like avoiding it, and then we can think, oh, I'm not motivated, or I need motivation. You don't necessarily need motivation. You need to be just looking somewhere else that can really help. It's the bottleneck. It's very clear it's the bottleneck. Then you'll probably feel more motivated just through the clarity of it. And also if you stop buying into this feeling of being progress, like it's always the answer, and think of it as ridiculous as thinking that 12 is always the answer, no math problem. It's just sometimes the answer. Sometimes a certain type of growth is exactly what you need, right? You might want to grow your email list or your prospective customer list, right? There's plenty of times when a specific type of growth or progress is absolutely the answer, right? And again, always a certain type of growing understanding is the answer anyway. But beware, whenever you feel afraid of a feeling of regress, or you suspect it, if you feel like kind of not motivated, wait a second, am I not motivated because I'm kind of afraid of how I might feel about myself and my identity if I go do this, then again, try to, wait a second, this is all related to this feeling of progress is always the right answer, therefore not regress. And what's going to happen when we want progress, our mind is going to be like, what are the kind of seeks the easiest route, or the most direct route? How do we get a feeling of progress easiest? Is by something that, again, we'll instead of working on the bottleneck, the thing that's going to give us the most return, right? Always putting resource into the limiting reagent, the bottleneck, whatever, that by logic is always going to give us the biggest return, right? We're going to open up the thing that's most kind of constraining us. So that's always where we should be focused. Where are we going to feel like focusing if we intuitively want progress and growth? Well, in the place where we're going to see progress and growth. We're like, yeah, I'm growing my list, I'm growing my list. I've seen this, practically speaking. Well, people, oh, my list is such and such big. Lauren and Ashley pointed out something very profound yesterday, which is it isn't necessarily better to have a big list, right? It's a great thing to boast about it. You're at a convention, I don't think here, but those large conventions, people go and they're always taking selfies and bragging about how they make such and such amount a month because they made that much gross profit 1 month 3 years ago, right? And then they round way up. And it was them and a few partners, and they got there's almost no profit. They got a quarter of it, right? And then they're on their video, on their Facebook video, yeah, I'm a guru. Right, but it's very, very, very correct, very smart, very profound, right? You want, especially just with the algorithm and everything, it's just based on a number of things, expense, algorithms with deliverability. You want to get that list where people just obviously you're not cutting it off, but you within a reasonable eyeballing or metrics, you're cutting out people that are not helpful right now. They're definitely. If you want progress, though, and think about that, and you're just oh, and I've seen this. I've absolutely seen it. Growing list. I'm like, we're not making money from this list. And it's yeah, but it's growing. Right? And it's just very real. I've seen this from, real people and real people that are otherwise successful in plenty of endeavors. But it comes in all over the place. We'll focus on where there's growth. We'll want to look there or progress. And again, so it's distracting from the obvious correct answer, which is bottlenecks. And I don't mean obvious we should see it in advance. Plenty of things are obvious. I think about this stuff all the time, right? It's where I focus. So of course it's obvious to me, but when I mean obvious, after we stop and think about it, after I point it out, that's it's obvious. It's kind of funny, and I feel this and live this for real, intuitively to my subconscious, it's eating food feels like progress, right? If I'm watching something on a video or watching a sport or something like that, then I'll feel like eating. Because my mind will, unless I'm walking. If I'm walking, that kind of feels like progress because I'm going somewhere, right? So if I'm listening to something, whatever. If I'm walking, that's all good to my brain and my body. It's all right, good. We're walking, that's making progress. But otherwise, want to eat. So, and that's not helpful. That's another example of something that, of course, we do need to eat sometimes. It's definitely the right answer to some degree to eat rather than not, right? But then it can very much be the wrong answer to just keep eating and eating, right? But it feels so right to me, But that's another example and proof of how our mind goes there, and it just associates certain things with progress. It really, my body really feels, and it really feels like progress to eat rather than to not, in a certain sense, right? And so it also shows how perceived progress is not the same as actual progress, in addition to the very fact that looking at progress is the right answer all the time, and growth, right? Imagine one person makes $200,000 a year. Then there's another guy, psychologically, if someone makes $200,000 a year and then kind of does nothing for the next year, that person that's doing nothing might have this feeling of well, I'm kind of worthless, I'm kind of depressed, I'm not really doing anything, I'm not growing. But then compare that with a person who makes $100,000 both those years. Well, it's the exact same amount of money. But one of them, according to our conventional cultural thinking that's so right, one person's wasting their life and is a bum and is worthless for a year. And they both accomplish the exact same thing, right? So I realized that, and that worked for me. And so now I can just not do anything and feel totally happy. Which is funny. It's funny, and I meant to be funny. But it is such a key, in my understanding, to happiness. Because the implication, if you just always need to be running or else you're unhappy, of course on top of that, we can always be doing something that really works, right? But But again, the only thing that we know is going to give us progress is understanding that's important, that's relevant, right? Which starts with understanding whatever the bottleneck is, right? And again, if we look at a relationship, it's such, like our love relationship, for example, also very important in business relationships. It's so important that this poison of needing growth, then you start looking at the other person. Are they growing? Are they progressing? Don't respect them as much. I'm disappointed in them. What? Right? Even like with intimacy, really just finding out what the other person likes and doing it like often or whatever, right? It can be exhausting to like reinvent the wheel like every time you guys are together and intimate. It's just, but people can feel like, oh, well, maybe this is boring or this, like that's just, how are you going to do that, right? It'd be great if we could just watch the same movie, like our favorite movie all the time, but unfortunately our brain just won't let us do that. Or imagine you could just watch your favorite show like it was the first time constantly, But again, it isn't necessarily the wrong answer, right? If you're adding like 8 and 4 and it comes out to 12, then great, then check in and then it's 12. If you're looking at what's going on and a certain type of growth and progress is what you need somewhere, then great, that's the right answer as long as you're thinking accurate. But just be suspect of it, automatically being, what's the time? Oh, we're good. We're good in various ways. Meaning I can be quiet anytime. Okay, so let me cover one thing quickly and then we can be done. We can discuss time if we want to have any discussion or questions or if we just want to move on. But let's take a look at a specific example of like an organizing principle in addition to the product traffic conversion that you maybe will have heard from me that I don't want to repeat. This is something I have touched on or talked about, but people kind of always like me revisiting, like kind of explaining more. And that's the idea of if you're sitting here and you're like, all right, I want to make more money, I want to make this plan work, I want to make my website project work well. Then what you can do, and this is a meta strategy, but it absolutely works well in business, is to look at it in terms of what I call a semi-soft lock plus competence. And again, I will make a sheet that has these keywords. So when you're, let's say you're playing chess or some other game against somebody, there's a point when you might hard lock them, which means that there's no possible way they can win, right? Like there's no way they can move, and next move you're going to checkmate them no matter what they do. Right? That'd be a hard lock. Like there's no way out. Then there's like a soft lock where you're ahead by like a queen and a rook or something like that, right? Where pretty much they're probably going to lose. Like it's pretty, but they're pretty much locked at that point. But it's not a hard lock. You wouldn't say it's not possible at all, but you're pretty much soft locked in the situation. Well, in situations, including most certainly business situations, or your project, your certain business project, there's going to be what I call a semi-soft lock. And I use this, a number of you know, this is years ago now, but in my 20s I was the top of the world in Magic the Gathering, right, which was the most popular strategy game at the time, and I use this consistently. This is how I thought about it, to get to the top of the world. And what's very practical in life to win or succeed or to make a website project work is you don't even need to get all the way. You don't need to get all the way to a hard lock, because of course you'll get there. Like you'll win at some point, but you don't need to start there. And you don't even need to get to a semi-soft, to a soft lock, where you have like a queen and a rook on top of soft. There's a way that if you you combine a sense of competence, which would look something like having a sense of what email looks like Lauren and Ashley were talking about, right? Like what it looks like if you have 1,000 customers and 500 of them are opening, or 300 of them or whatever, are opening up email. On video, it's like 500, but like something like 1,000 customers and a few hundred are opening up emails, and you know about what to do about that, then that's part of an example of competence. If you're also able to like deliver the product or have it delivered, things like that, right? So some sense of what competence looks like, which is different than automation and different than incompetence. Those are not the same. It's different than both. There's not synonyms. Competence and automation are different. But I don't look to have things automated, and I don't, of course, want to be incompetent. I don't need to hard lock something so much that I can be incompetent. If I competently do at something, what a semi-soft lock is as long as you're competent after that, you're basically going to win. Okay, and a great semi-soft lock that comes up constantly in our type of business is just free or nearly free or very cost-effective traffic. I'm not saying that it's what you have to do, but it's at least a very good example and one that I've always used, that I always go to, and it just works. So what I've always done, like all my money, is pretty much based on this semi-soft lock plus competence, right? I actually did sort of in one course where I talked for a long time about what I knew how to do with like my type of info marketing and so forth, right? In my massive advantage from your mortals thing that I released years ago. Mostly I don't teach direct stuff like that, but I did once. So that just like lists a whole bunch of stuff to do, and a lot of what you'll learn in a great way at these 2 days, and what you learn in general from Jason and Donovan, et cetera, is competence, right, at doing a website, e-commerce, obviously mostly affiliated is their main focus, but they can do a lot of course, the spectrum of things. So there's competence. So you want to have a sense of it, but you don't need hyper competence. Like you don't want to like to be like a YouTube star. That's kind of might be an example of like hyper competence. Like, oh, you just need to be on and just rock all the time and just be on and just be amazing all the time. That's not competence in what I'm talking about. That's like hyper competence. So you don't want to have to struggle. When you're being competent and you know how to do it, it's not a struggle. You just kind of do it. There's plenty of things that each of us have where we're just competent at it, whether in business or also in our daily lives, right? We just can do it. We do it pretty well. We can explain to someone who didn't know it very well how to be competent at that type of thing in life, right? And we don't like struggle. We just do it, and we do it well. But it's not like we don't even need to do it super well. We just know how to do it. We have an environment in that thing in our lives where as long as we do it just fine, just quite well as we're used to, then it just works. It's all good, right? So competence, not hyper-competence, but not automation, not incompetence, coupled with this semi-soft lock. So a semi-soft lock might be, you're even literally up by like a pawn or two. If you know how to be competent in chess, which I don't, I don't really play chess. But you can imagine someone is competent enough that if they're up by that, they're generally going to win. So then what you do, the reason for this is, you then pour all of your resources, you go all in on that semi-soft lock. See, that's the magic, is you figure out just that threshold where combined with then competence, you're going to pretty much win. And you put everything into that. Like if you just go all in on free traffic, let's say. And the idea here is that with a semi-soft lock, you're pretty much also guaranteed to accomplish that. See, the cool thing about this is, like, I don't like to struggle in life. I like to win before I attack, so to speak. Right? With this, you're pretty much winning before you attack. So that the first thing you're trying to do is get a gauge of these two things, which can take some time. It might even take years to get a sense. It might take a few days. It might take a few minutes if you have enough contextual knowledge and stuff already. Right? You might think about it and you might get it. I might be telling you the answer for some of you. Right? But if free traffic, if you go all in, if you do nothing but just figure out, do, right, learn and practice. A lot of you know, of course, and do this, but you learn how and practice SEO, right, to get free traffic for something relevant. And if you just is that the only thing that you're pouring your resources into in life, except for maintaining your life otherwise, like that's in a necessary way, then you can accomplish it, right? I'm not even going to ask, it's true, right? Given our context, given the SEO is taught in our world the way it is, then you go all in on the semi-soft, right? Then you go all in on how do I get ahead by 1 or 2 points, right? Metaphorically. That when people don't have this model, then their resources, they're not directed in the right way. Like people might know the idea of focus, but where? Of course, focus is nothing other than just saying spend a lot. When you think about it, right? Focus just means put a lot of resources. Well, that can't be the secret to success. The secret to success, or at least strategy, is to put the resources in their best alternative use. It's not that you just spend a lot or that you just focus, right? It's that you have to focus in the right place, which you can only do if you understand where that place is, right? So the first thing you're trying to do is figure out where do I focus. And then, so the semi-soft lock idea is like, bam, all right, I got it. If I get that one thing, can I then be competent and make the rest work? And not necessarily until you figure out what competence is, right? Competence is not super easy, but if you try to learn competence in a certain area in life, you'll almost certainly know. Because again, we're not talking about hyper-competence, right? We're talking about if you just have a certain amount of targeted free traffic from certain keywords, which is obviously targeted, right? Coming to a website, can you then make money if can you get enough confidence to make money, right? That means a store that looks a certain way, that has a certain decent amount of products, and that you follow up with the right collecting emails, right? It's pretty hard to be profitable in the right way, or profitable though we want to be without email. I agree. It's huge, right? And so, can you do that, right? And then you can look at your previous plans and think, did I think about it that way? Right? Or was I just thinking, oh, I hope this works, I want to make this work, I want to make progress, I need to grow this, I need to grow that, or I need to feel motivated about this or that, right? First you're just trying to understand. You don't need to know the semi-soft and confidence the next minute, right? If you take a while just to figure this out, you're still automatically going to win, right? Because once you identify a semi-soft lock and confidence, you're pretty much going to do it. You're going to it's going to happen. Because a semi-soft, there's going to be somewhere in a business endeavor that if you just go all in, you can get that. And if you get that spot right, like I gave the example of free traffic, mixed with you, does that kind of come together? Like it's an amazing meta strategy, and I really do it all the time. Like it's not like I made this up, like it sounds good. And I talk about it to people, like, no, I do it. Right? And I do it on purpose, and I actually do it. And when I forget or when it's not going on, it's just such a, so that kind of can go along. It's an example instead of growth. That's an example of an operating principle or an organizing principle. That's what's really valuable, is accumulating organizing principles, operating principles, right? So again, like with math, you can remember this if you go through math, right? Like organizing principles are like the major concepts. What is addition? What is multiplication? That sort of thing. Exponents. But, operating principles are kind of things like formulas, or like with sales, right? Like feel, felt, found. Agitate, solve, right? Those are like formulas that are helpful for like a salesman, right? Problem, agitate, solve. Hopefully you know that. If you don't know it, write it down. Problem, agitate, solve if you're writing a sales letter or doing something sales related. Feel, felt, found. Like oh, I see how you feel. I felt the same way. Then I found this solution. Right. So those are just kind of somewhat well known, or what wisdom. Again, people that focus on that know that stuff. That's what they do. Those are examples of formulas, right? Operating principles, and then there's relevant background knowledge, right? Like there's lots with SEO where there's like, you wouldn't call it a formula or an organizing principle, but there's just stuff you have to know. If someone just says WordPress back office, you either picture something or you don't. If it's like a vague thing in your mind, then you would want that not to be vague. That's an example of good background knowledge, right? So that's where you're going to have real progress. If you just feel like, oh, I want to make progress, then your brain's going to go to the easiest place to feel progress. You're going to be scared of regress, which is a constant problem for us, including just being able to critique each other, right? People feel like a regress, feeling like an anti-progress if someone says, oh, you can do this better. Oh, does that mean I'm not so good at it right now? You have to lose real. So that's the bottom line. My diatribe against growth and progress. And it's arbitrary, right? It's like you make a certain, you have a good month for some various reasons. The only thing you can do is make more the next month. Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? Again, it distracts. It can literally destroy sometimes, and it can make you discontent when you don't need to be. Why just have a landmine in your life that make you discontent, like virtually literally every day? Plenty of people, they're literally feel bad at a certain point every day, unless they feel like they've accomplished a certain amount, and if they and that'll drive them from the beginning of the day. It's not just an unpleasant feeling at the end of the day. It directs them throughout the day. And again, it distracts them from what they really should be doing. Because there's plenty of stuff you need to do, within seconds of being finished here, but there's plenty of stuff you need to do that, well, let me just say, the 4 quadrants from Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he says people tend, it has to do with urgent, whether things are urgent and important. And you can have the 4 combinations of that. Something could be, and what he says, what people mostly spend time on is things that are actually unimportant, but feel urgent, because someone near them feels like it's urgent, or it's right. So you're doing all these things that kind of feel urgent, but they're actually unimportant. They don't really get to your head. And he says you might need to do those things if they're urgent, but you need to make time to do things that are not urgent, but they're important. Right? Certainly if something's urgent and important, then like your building's on fire, then you deal with that first. But then a lot of people get stuck in the urgent but unimportant. That's that feeling of progress or not regress. Not having the person that's next to you be disappointed in you, or they feel like something's, whatever it is, urgent, but does that impact? We want to get to our, of course, one purpose, focused on things that are not urgent. In other words, if it's not urgent, all that means is our mind doesn't perceive it as progress he doesn't really feel the progress, right? Like, because then we just do that, right? If you really felt progress, like the things that you're putting off, one way of looking at it is you just say you're not motivated or this or that, or you're anxious, but also like your mind doesn't perceive it as real progress. Like there's a way, you might even affirm constantly, no, absolutely I need to do that, but I just never do. But somehow he doesn't feel, like I know I need to eat less, right? But I don't feel like eating less, I always feel like eating more. I eat less than I otherwise want to, believe you me, like a lot less than I want. And it still isn't enough less, right? And that's how it is working, right? Like there's things that are important, we'll affirm they're important, we don't feel it. But the more we're not looking, I notice like the more a good thing is probably think more about your stomach than your mouth, right? Like you think about your mouth, you want to eat something. You think about your stomach, and you're like, I don't want to eat it. You know, like you can feel full. But I think about how it tastes. Same, similar with the business. If you're thinking about, oh, I want to make progress, it's like your mouth. If you're thinking about where's the bottleneck, what's actually important, it's not perfect. Like your mind still is going to mess with you, right? But if you're looking there, it's at least going to give you much more of a Okay, I don't know, we might just be fully done here, and then I'm willing to talk a little bit about it in terms of answering questions or any discussion. I don't know what the right answer is or even how to address the right answer. I want to hear Vernon as well, so I don't know how that was. Okay.
Jim Will.
Yeah, of course, Jim.
One of the things you talked about was the field found method.
Yes.
And I looked it up on Google, and it says this helps your customer to realize two things. First, that you can get how they are feeling and also how they aren't alone. Other customers have been other customers have been where they are.
Yeah.
And finally, you tell the customer what you or other customers have found to work in this situation.
Yeah, if anyone isn't familiar with feel, felt, found, I just couldn't expound on everything. Definitely look it up. And I mean, there's teaching about it and so forth. So, yeah, I didn't stick to things that I came up with, when I expound on things. But definitely make sure you're familiar with feel, felt, found, and problem, agitate, solve for a sales letter. Yeah.
What did you say before feel, felt, found? You said another 3-letter.
Problem, agitate, solve. That's for like a sales letter. The problem, agitate, solve means you are describing a problem in your sales letter. You are then getting into the problem and how bad it is, and helping people feel it and get immersed in it, and then you're providing the solution in your sales letter. That's kind of a general scheme for whenever you're writing a sales letter or anything that amounts to a sales letter, which is most anything.
Second word, that's what I was trying to get.
Oh, great, agitate. Yeah, you're kind of expounding on the problem and immersing the reader in the problem, so they kind of get immersed and feel it. Of course, it's a problem. You're not inventing a problem for them. It's a little bit similar to feel, felt, found. Yeah.
Love what you have to say. Quick question about bottleneck and kind of how our nature is to focus on progress, but what you're saying is focus on bottlenecks.
Yeah.
Can you explain how to go against nature to identify the bottleneck? I guess a different way.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm thinking off the top of my head here. I mean, I've taught about this, but I live it too. Like this is absolutely not right again. That I came up with. I'm trying to explain how I do things. But sometimes when you live something, it's a little hard to explain it. You know, in a funny way. So whether or not this is helpful, the more we kind of understand the different types of bottlenecks. In my very first definitive series video on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/law of implication. Just one word, law of implication. And I'll put that on my slide. My thing, I'll get out to you guys. The first video, I talked extensively about bottlenecks and identifying them and thinking about them, and so forth. I give, and so like a bottleneck, just a bottleneck is one type of what I mean by bottlenecks. There could be another thing would be sometimes a path looks right. Let's say you're on a cart or a car or a go-kart, like a racetrack or a long kind of distance cart type of track race thing, and you're trying to go. Then what I pointed out in that video is that people tend to identify with like them on the cart, and if they're making progress and going quickly, they feel good. But if you think about you need to reach the end and maybe you try to reach it quickly, then what you really need to do is make sure that there's a whole number of things you need to watch out for in terms of obstacles and bottlenecks between the cart and the finish line. One of them could even be, there could be false paths, where a path looks correct, but the correct path is kind of more hidden that you have to look for it. I mean, let's say it was intentionally designed so that there's these obstacles and false things, right? Which is life, not intentionally designed that way, but life is that way, where things will look like the right path, but it's the wrong path. And so you think you're making progress, you're like on the cart and it's going well, and you like that feeling of progress, so you don't want to look around to see if it's the wrong path, because then you might feel a feeling of regress, or it's just fun. Like, the thing is, when people feel progress, they want to keep looking right here, right? It's nice to be in the moment, but not if you're going off a cliff, right? So, there's a time to be in the moment, and there's a time to be looking to see if you're going off a cliff or just on the wrong path. And so, another type of bottleneck would be the wrong. So when you have like a list of these, which I listed in the video, of types of things that could be a bottleneck, inertia, getting started, right? A huge bottleneck for people is often getting started either with a sub-task or overall with a project. And you might, I once gave kind of a little bit of a rant about do anything, like pay whatever to get started, right? Like you must get started, Now, how do you relate that to semi-soft locks? Sure, I mean, better to identify the semi-soft lock and confidence. But in order to start identifying, the thing is one way to gain understanding, and part of what has to be done, if you're trying to gain understanding of soccer, there's kind of two things that'll help. One is to watch video of soccer and or like teaching about it, and the other is to play soccer, even if you're fairly incompetent at the beginning, right? You need to get on the field and do stuff, and you should be doing some sort of reflecting, watching, coaching, like those two go hand in hand. So anything to get started is worth it, because but it helps for you to know what you're looking for, which is a semi-soft lock and confidence. And of course, you're also can think of it in terms of bottleneck. I'm not going to try to blend those together. Those are both models that you can use separately, but like when I say like the semi-soft lock and the confidence thing is one model. It does not conflict with breaking bottlenecks. It's just in addition to, right? You can just have both tools and you use them both kind of separately, but on the same project. And so bottlenecks can be inertia. It might be acceleration, like there might be a hill that you have to get over, and if you're not going fast enough, like if it's not an engine but it's based on momentum of some sort, right, of your own thing, then you might need enough momentum that you can get past certain obstacles, right? Or like you can imagine if you have a truck in your driveway that's inclined, then a 2x4 behind the wheels might keep it there and keep it from rolling down. But if you're going on a highway 60 miles an hour or faster, then that 2x4, you're just going to go right over it, right? So for plenty of, that 2x4 would be a bottleneck, and the answer is momentum. Or we could say that momentum would be the bottleneck, that you just need a certain amount of momentum. Like, for example, you have a course, right? Or an event even, and a certain amount of people doing it. Or if you have an affiliate promoting an information course, not that you guys are in this situation, but just to illustrate. If you have an affiliate promoting an information course, there needs to be a certain amount of sales that an affiliate's going to make for that affiliate to keep on promoting in that same promotion. They might need to make a few sales early on, and also in order to have other people promote in the future. So you can't get that free affiliate traffic unless you have enough momentum in terms of a good enough sales process that it works like early on, which is partially difficult. That's why it's really nice to have Google free traffic, because it trickles in and you can test things and get it right. When it's affiliate marketing like I do, you have to get it kind of right for it to work really quickly, right? So luckily I'm good enough with my doing that it all works out, but sometimes. So momentum is sometimes the bottleneck. Inertia is sometimes the bottleneck. False trails are sometimes the bottleneck. Of course, actual fences or obstructions that need to be cleared out can be the bottleneck. And then something that needs to be widened, or the too rough of a path, is more like an actual bottleneck, especially if it's just too narrow and you need to open it, Or you're racing other people and you're just too slow. I mean, you could say, well, isn't that momentum? But these are just things to ask yourself. It's a little bit different than momentum if you have a slightly different metaphor, and you might just need an engine that's fast enough to outrace certain competition if that's going on. But don't default to always think there's competition. Just like with progress, don't always think you need to compete. I try to avoid situations where I need to compete if possible. I won't avoid them at all costs, but I'm just not going to if I'll look around for a better choice, right, where I don't need to compete. Why would I compete when there's often, by looking around, there's a place you don't really need to compete or not need as much. So I don't like default where it's always competition, always need, where I have to be the best. Why would I have to be the best? Like, don't I just need a certain amount of money? Maybe I need to be a lot better than the best, because the best, when I'm doing an information course with actual people that are investing thousands of dollars, I wasn't like, OMG needs to be the best. I was like, OMG needs to work for me. Maybe that's way better than the best. And people could argue, at certain times that's what it was, right? So the best might not be nearly good enough, or the best might be wholly unnecessary. You don't have to be the best at all kinds of things in business, my gosh. If you're top 10%, I mean, you're crushing it in most things, right? When you love, like if just a little bit parallel, but it's the same type of thinking. With an employee, if you're a top 10% employee, first of all, you're a bonanza for your employer, but you're also good for bonanza for yourself. You'll do great if you're just top 10. Like, I mean, it's still, you're 1 out of 10, but that's pretty accomplishable typically. Most anyone that's just paying attention in life is going to automatically be in the top 10. Like the top 10. That's funny. It's true. It's funny because it has truth to it, right? Like, all you need to do is just pay attention to it. Oh, because you probably know with employees, right? But if they just pay attention, they'll be in your top 10% of employees. I've never had an employee, but I'm sure that's true, right? Just, oh my God.
That's why most people can't pay. They can't pay attention.
Right, just basic confidence. So I know that because in games, you pay attention, you're just like have basic confidence. So, and business, you don't need to be the best. And again, but that might mean you need to be way better than the best if it's other people's butt is on the line, right? Like with customers that are members of OMG, people, it might have been their last chance for something. And there's times it's $5,000, even $8,000. So that better work for people. Best isn't good enough. Other times, why on earth would you have to do the best? Just you start out of money and you do fine. Customers are not shopping at every single, they're not comparison shop. How much do you comparison shop really? Right? You go to a store and most of the time, I mean, some of you might be different, but most of the time, you're hoping that store just has something that you like. We were talking about furniture. We went and got a love seat that we were very happy with. We went to one place, Rooms to Go, we're cheap. And we just went and we find something we liked. We weren't like, well, how is this better than, than this other store somewhere else? Right? Even if some people do comparison shop, a lot of people don't. Right? So again, you just need to have something good if it fills what you're saying, and so forth. But it's just an irrelevant beacon to think about being the best or But again, that's another operating principle that I just explained. If you don't have that, you have like a wrong operating principle that's idea of being the best. It might be the answer, but it probably isn't. You either most always need to be better than the best or don't need to be the best at all. One of those two. How likely is it that just being a little bit better than some arbitrary other person who's currently first is exactly where you do it? Only in the situation where your customers are like audition, right? Think of that. You probably don't have audition. I should go have audition. Anyway, okay, that's a good idea. Go on. Sorry, there might be something urgent, but I also want to.
Do you have a real world example in your business life that you found a bottleneck and then you worked through it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll look at a traffic jam of a million of those things. I mean, it's all I do. Like literally, I'll think of an example, but all I do is go from a bottleneck to bottleneck. And the good thing there, see, if by default, seeking understanding, meaning about what's important and impactful, not just inquiring minds want to know, not that kind of right. What was I going to say? Seeking bottlenecks. Is intuitively it actually feels like an inconvenience to me. It's like, darn it, now I need to figure out something, I need to understand something instead of just making progress. It's like, because there's a darn bottleneck, now I need to seek understanding and make it so I can get back to what I really want, which is progress. Instead, if you look at life, as there's always a bottleneck until everyone is perfectly happy forever. And yes, I think that's possible. Somehow. That's how God's rigged things. Okay? And then, of course, the earth needs to change, right? Like there needs to be a major physical change, but I know God exists. And so that can all happen. So until and unless that's the case, then there's a bottleneck. So once you embrace, there's literally always a bottleneck. And just to be simple, back to business. In a business, you either have all the money you need, or there's a bottleneck. Or it's just a matter of churning out time, or you just know, okay, this is no problem. I absolutely can just be confident here keep doing it, I now have, but that is having all the money you need, basically. If you could just do something you absolutely know how to do and keep making the money, and you somehow know that's going to keep working, you know? Usually that would happen if you're kind of close to the money you need or something. And you say, well, what if there's no ceiling on the money I need? Well, figure out how much money you need, and then you can have no ceiling after that and help people and so forth. But there's still a difference between having what you need and not. It's like putting your mask on in a plane. I really believe in that metaphor, like expansively. I take care of myself first. It's not selfish. It's just, again, the airplane metaphor. You put your mask on even before your kid. Because you can just help your kid better if your mask is on, right? And they don't twist, together, you're not panicking and rushing and so forth. So there's a certain amount that you need that's finite. You can ballpark it, right? And then that gives you a clarity. Okay. So we want to embrace the idea that there's always a bottleneck. That's not pessimistic at all. It's it's good. Like there's always more understanding to be had until and unless everything's perfect, or you hit your threshold in a specific goal, which is still a bottleneck on the way to perfect happiness and so forth. And it doesn't matter if someone says, well, can we really achieve perfect happiness? It doesn't matter. We can have more right now. And certainly other people can have more and can be helped by us in some way. And so and there's certainly things that are definitely done wrong right now by ourselves. There's ideas that are definitely bad. Let's start with those. Get rid of those and then we'll see. We'll go from there, right? So at least we'll do that. And same thing in your business, right? You can typically do better and have some sense of where you're getting. So you embrace that. There's always a bottleneck. So it stops being an inconvenience. It stops being something you're trying to rush through and that you're trying to avoid seeing because that feels like regress. So now it's always there. We like seeing it. It feels like progress to understand and identify it better. So once it feels like progress to figure out your bottleneck, then I would just make a list of the types of things. Or you just walk through, a little bit like if you're going on vacation, you're trying to figure out what to bring. Then the best thing to do is walk through your day. Then you remember, okay, I need my toothbrush, I need my comb, I need whatever you need, my umbrella, you think of the range. So just walk through product traffic conversion. Oh, you wanted an actual example, not like how to do it. Webinar's not working, right? Like a webinar, and so for us who do affiliate marketing, a webinar needs to do a certain amount well, or else we can't get other affiliates to promote, or that particular affiliate to keep promoting. It's just a real problem. And even if we got some affiliates to promote, they wouldn't be making any sales because the webinar is not selling, right? We might have affiliates to promote, we might have a great product, but the sales process. So then I focus in, and that's the only thing I'm having people focus on, except maintaining the stuff that has to be maintained, right? The only resources you pour into breaking a bottleneck are the ones you have to spare. You don't have things to spare that are going to destroy something that you need to keep maintaining. So of course, you have maintenance costs in your life, and they're not necessarily costs, like you might have a wonderful marriage that you obviously are not going to totally neglect, right? So you put a certain amount of focus into that happily. As Vernon said, you want to have some fun in your life and all that. I don't mean spend all your time. I'm just saying spend all the resources that are kind of correctly available, but then put them all into the thing. I don't know if this is a terrible type of answer, but I find it fairly obvious what a bottleneck is when I'm kind of understand about bottlenecks and when I'm looking at it. And then it's really something with product, something with traffic, something with conversion of this business. There's only 3 places to look. And it's, which of these is the place that if I opened it up, it would be the most benefit? It's like kind of most stopping me up. And then you can, of course, get a little granular with that. There might be a certain place in there. And it might be an issue with relationships, right? Like when I say product traffic and conversion, there's no word relationships in there. But a ton of what we do in business, involves relationships with people that we're working with in various ways. And so dealing with a relationship, and maybe you have an issue, you don't understand how to deal with certain issues that come up in relationships, right? There's people I know like that. Just like all of us are bad at most things, right? Like we have some areas of competence, and then we mostly don't know about other topics and things, right? There's all kinds of things we don't know about it. Plenty of people, they're just not naturally great at repairing relationships. But if you don't know how to repair relationships or correcting a sort of issue when there's like a potential misunderstanding, or if you don't even realize that, like people hear someone say, here's a bottleneck that happened. People hear someone say something and then their mind automatically interprets it, and they just think that's what the person said. But how we interpret what we think a person said, it feels, our brains makes us feel like that is what they said. sometimes you literally can mishear someone, you mishear the word, and then other times, of course, you just misinterpret because you're based on your brain. And it never occurs to some people that they can be misinterpreted. Or someone says that someone else said something or did something, and that's just false. Happens all the time. Or that person, they're not even necessarily lying, they just misinterpret that, or they, and then, but you take it for granted, well, that happened. Or this person doesn't like me, or this person's annoyed at me, or whatever. Or people will make stuff up in their head that, oh, this person doesn't seem to, may not like me anymore, it's been a week, all kinds of stuff, right? So that could be a bottleneck, you don't realize it. So another thing to look for, as I talk myself into that, is when something just keeps on not working in your life, then you might not even have the tools to see the bottleneck with that, and an example is with this relationship type stuff, just basic, what I consider basic, and of course, I have a few competencies in life, but the rest I'm incompetent, and I don't mean that you should be competent at the exact same things all the time. So I don't mean to be in any way condescending when I say some basic, but basic if you kind of get decent at it, right? And by the way, you don't even have to fix these things, you can just partner up with someone who's just kind of good at dealing with relationships. Right? There's all kinds of things. The great thing about business and life is you can sometimes just partner up with people that are good at stuff, but sometimes often people that are bad at relationship stuff like that, they don't realize it. And if you just realize it, then great, just partner up with someone where it's not an issue. Right? So it's just good. Like the bottleneck just in that case might just be realizing that you just have, like you just don't know what to do. I know people, it's in a good, like again, it's not being critical, it just is the case. That they just don't know what to do if something even goes a little bit wrong or someone's just not quite doing what they want in a business in a partnership, and they just don't know what to do and they kind of get pieces. So that could be an example of a bottleneck, and I deal with that type of bottleneck all the time. I'm good at that kind of thing, and it's like shocking how much that can come up in reality, especially if it's something that you can spot. Right? A lot of people don't even realize it comes up and it just messes it up. Awesome, great question, thank you. And thanks for everyone with the questions and that you put it out. I better just at some point stop so that we can. That's good.